Well, good morning and hello, everyone. I'm Abigail Ramsbottom, Curator of Education at the South Dakota Art Museum. Taylor, like Donna mentioned, is on vacation, so I'll be hosting today. And just a big welcome and thank you for joining us for the second virtual artist chat featuring artists from the South Dakota Governor's 10th Biennial Exhibition. The biennial exhibitions aim to recognize and encourage South Dakota artists, to promote the artistic identity of South Dakota, and to foster a larger sense of community and connection among artists within the state. We're so happy you're here this morning. The biennial exhibitions are in large part made possible through generous grant funding from the South Dakota Arts Council. This virtual artist chat is made possible through the generous support of donors like you. Because the South Dakota Arts Museum receives operational funding from the South Dakota State University and South Dakota Arts Council, your donations, membership, and gifts fund fantastic exhibitions and programs like this. Thank you. Shortly, we'll hear from 4 artists featured in the biennial whose work is on display at the South Dakota Art Museum in Brookings through May 14th. Joining us this morning are artists Skott Chandler, Molly Fulton, Tom Dempster, and James Pollock. Each artist will share about themselves and their artwork, followed by a brief Q&A. Please save questions for the end of the program or feel free to put them in the chat throughout. I will introduce each artist and then moderate the Q&A at the end. And without further ado, we can get started. Okay. And before I turn it over to the artist, I just wanted to share some gallery shots. And these shots are featuring the artist's work. We have Scott's pieces, James' piece is here. Molly and Tom's is featured over here. And then this is another gallery shot to give you an idea. But as I said, please come see the show in person. It's not the same as seeing it on a screen. So we're going to start with Skott today. Skott Chandler is a photographic artist and educator at Black Hills State University in Spearfish, South Dakota. His photographic work focuses on experimental and digital photographic processes. His inspiration is the concept of photographic truths, how a photograph can mislead and misrepresent because of the choices made by the creator. Skott's image making is about the perception of truth, the human relationships with time, spaces, fear, night, the unseen, and the unknown. Skott?
Thank you. It's weird to hear somebody actually read that thing that you've typed up that's supposed to sound so much like you. So you can pause that, yeah, so it doesn't keep looping because everybody probably already saw it. So it's fun to get to talk about this work because I'm still making it. And this is a very recent body of work that I started. Actually, I think it was just last October that I started making these, like September, October. So the image that you're seeing that was just looping on the screen is actually what inspired this. So this is the asteroid Dimorphos, and it orbits another asteroid called Didymos, I think is what it's called. This asteroid that you're looking at is 560 feet in diameter. And on the 26th of September last year, we actually crashed a satellite in it to deflect it. So that was called DART. It was the Double Asteroid Redirection Test. And so I have had a love for space things and space images for a long time. But as I watched this, it was kind of surreal because these are massive objects. They're kind of scaleless in this black void. And it just got me to thinking about, wow, people really don't, sometimes these are so unbelievable and they don't feel as heavy as they really are. So I started thinking about these images, and then I found, I actually have it here, this old book. So this is I don't know if you can see it. This is an old NASA Apollo book. And it's probably from the 60s or 70s. And I actually got it when my friend's basement flooded at their house, and their dad had this, and I was so obsessed with the imagery in it of the astronauts and the moon landing surfaces. And so all this kind of combined in my head, and I started thinking about Stanley Kubrick, the famous director who did 2001: A Space Odyssey, and how he was accused of faking the moon landing. And so I was like, looking at these photos, they're so unbelievable. I think I could probably fake asteroid photos. So if you'll go to the next slide. So these are the photos that are in the exhibition, and someone's asking if I need special equipment to do these. I'll actually show you the equipment that I'm using to do these. So these are the ones that are in the book. So what I've been thinking about this whole time is truth in a photograph, and we've got this notion of this history of sayings with photography, like the photo never lies, like show me the photographic proof. And I've always been the complete opposite of that. A photo may never lie, but the photographer can lie. And that's what I'm trying to express in these. The only thing that a photograph actually shows somebody is that something was in front of a camera. And so after watching the whole pandemic and everything that's happened, that people have a hard time trusting experts. People want to, they didn't even want to keep themselves safe. I was thinking about all this stuff, and then these celestial objects, and the fact that we literally have a redirection system for these asteroids that could significantly change or destroy the entire planet. So I started thinking about all these things, and I started making these photographs. And so if you go to the next slide, because these are the ones in the exhibition, the ones in the top left are actual asteroid photos, and then the ones in the bottom right are the photos that I've been creating in my studio. So it is kind of a technical challenge to do these. I had to buy a little bit of equipment that I'll show you, but when I started making these, I don't know if anyone's seen the film that was on Netflix called Don't Look Up, where two scientists find out that there's an asteroid that's going to impact Earth, and then everybody yells at each other about if it's actually going to happen or not, and they're telling everybody that it's like a 99.9% chance and no one will believe them. So when I was making these, I wanted to highlight the potential for humans to be misled by information or to trust information that is not real. And I don't want to say that people don't pay attention, but I just am trying to say that if you feed somebody the right amount of visual information and make it look that way, you can make them believe things. So I don't call these photos asteroids. I just call this series near misses, which kind of leads one to believe that it's something that came close. And then I've made up kind of a NASA looking numerical system that kind of dates the day that I photographed them. And I photograph them and just put them out and let people make assumptions on them. So it's this inability for people to differentiate between truth and fiction in a photo, and it speaks to the power of visual culture. And so visual culture can lead people to interpret things, to gain misinformation. And I just love this idea because I've always been a fan of science fiction, and I think sometimes fiction can be closer to the truth than truth can. Sometimes I think about like Animal Farm, because we all know that was really about animals on a farm. And so with these photos, I just kind of want people to pay attention and have these thoughts of this greater existence and this stuff that's out there. So when I make these, I select rocks. Actually, I live across the street. I teach at Black Hill State University. I live pretty close to the university. And so there is a kind of river rock bed that lines one of the parking lots. And I've been collecting all the rocks from that on my walks to and from school ever since that. So I just look for ones that have kind of the same aesthetic as the ones you see in the top left. And then I photograph them in the studio and use the right lighting and the right backgrounds to make them look like celestial space objects. So if you go to the next one, I'll show you my studio setup. So if you look at the left is the first one that I ever photographed. So when I started this one, I was actually trying to hang the rocks from like fishing line, and that became a challenge because they kind of swing back and forth. And when you're really close with a camera, it starts to get a little hard to keep it in focus. So actually the first two images in the show were shot with this method, just kind of in the dining room of my house. And I was like, this is really dumb. I really need to find a better way to do this. And so because I teach at the university, I tend to have access to a little bit more equipment than some others do. So if you see the second photo and the third photo right there, the two in the middle, that is my current setup. So I 3D printed pretty much a golf tee to hold up these rocks, and then I've got it on the black background, and then I've got my light that I can move to either side to light it, and sometimes I'll twist the rock and look through the viewfinder like you see on the right to see what looks the most real to me before I take the photos. So the camera I'm using is actually pretty important for me as a photographer. So the camera is a Hasselblad 500 CM, and if you know the history of that camera is actually the same model of camera that the astronauts used during the Apollo missions. So that was the moon camera. It's actually the main reason that I bought that camera when I was in undergrad back in the early 2000s. And so I've had this camera for years, but being that it's the moon camera, I felt like it gave a level of authenticity. So all this is shot on a 1960s, 1970s film camera. So yeah, that's kind of the process of it. But I always think to myself, when I'm selecting these rocks, I have to think of their counterparts that are floating around us in the universe. And that's kind of a weird thing to do, to draw those parallels of, you know, there are big rocks sitting up there that could literally wipe out this planet. And so when I start lighting them in the studio, I have to think about that vast cosmic unknown. And it makes me think about my favorite person from history, Carl Sagan, and some of his quotes about, you know, we're just kind of a speck in this big cosmic dark, and that it kind of should be humbling to us and get us to kind of treat everybody in the planet a little bit nicer. So when I'm trying to replicate this and when people see it, I hope it kind of gives them not really an existential crisis, but kind of a detached perspective to say, wow, there are things like this. There are these things, these ominous presences that, you know, could take us out in the blink of an eye. And we just kind of need to think about that, accept that, and trust the people who are trying to help you to see these things, acknowledge these things. And I follow NASA pretty diligently because I love seeing the imagery, being a photographic artist and being obsessed with space imagery. I follow it pretty close, and to see the amount of data they use to do these things and the little things they discover, and just knowing that so much is always changing. I'm playing with people and trying to get them to believe that these are real, but I feel like in getting them to believe that they're real, I get them to think about their own beliefs and think about their own ideals and think about how these things can relate. So yeah, I guess, was that 10 minutes or was I too long, too short?
You're perfect. You're all
right.
good.
Hopefully that makes some sense. So yeah, and the only special gear I had to get is, it's really hard to focus close in photography, macro photography, and these lenses are so old. They're from the 60s, I think one lens is, and from the 80s is the other lens. So I had to get kind of an adapter ring so I could get as close to the objects as I wanted to. And I'm thinking about now trying to do more kind of video stuff to kind of replicate that first video of it crashing into the object. And I found some new surface photos, and I have a bellows macro adapter where I can get very close and almost look like I'm on the surface of these rocks. So I might start doing some fake surface photos here in the near future. So
Awesome. Thank you. That was really fascinating to see behind the curtain a little bit. Next, we'll be moving to Molly Fulton and Tom Dempster. So this is a collaborative work, and a collaboration between photographer Tom Dempster and Molly Fulton is an effort to express what we may not see, but sense in the land. The land across South Dakota is rich and full of variety. It is their attempt to capture it in still frame as it presents itself to the naked eye, and then engage with that landscape through the senses of what is really there. Created through the collaborative process, first of Tom's own photographic sense, and second through Molly's illustrative additions in acrylic gouache and acrylic marker. They contemplate the essence of the place and space as we understand it and enter into it to find what lies beneath.
Yeah,
Go ahead. Yep, Molly and Tom.
Molly, you want me to start?
That'd be great.
First of all, Abigail, I want to thank you for the opportunity to have this conversation, particularly having the conversation with other artists. Scott, I think that you will see as we talk about these things that we're absolutely on the same wavelength. I just finished a book, a short history of everything by Bill Bryson. And Bill Bryson says that the universe is very good, not only at creating life, but also more effective at even destroying life. He also tells us that every day we get up, we should understand that we're a trillionaire because our ancestors are the fish that came from the sea, and everything had to happen exactly correctly for us to be sitting here today having that conversation. So part of what I do for sure is express that sense of awe. Is that a Joseph Campbell thing? Of course, it's a Joseph Campbell thing. Just try and express that awe in seeing the beauty and the symmetry of who we are and what we are. It was also great to participate in the conversation, in the first conversation with artists, and see too that you have artists that are willing to walk into the maw of a tornado in order to get color right, and also people who want to replicate the Big Bang. So I just want to say it's delightful to be in this conversation. Very quickly, when I was 27 years old, I passed my brokerage test. And at the time when you passed your brokerage test, they would send you to an industrial psychologist. And what the industrial psychologist does is he holds up a mirror and says, "This is you." And this is what he said. He says, "Tom," he says, "you're a broker." That's what we called ourselves at the time. But you're also a politician, and you're also a writer in photography, and a photographer. He says, "The only words that I have for you, Tom, is that it's very important that you do all of those things simultaneously at the same time." And I did, and that's been a fabulous piece of advice. I'm a director of IFAM Capital, served on the county commission. But one of the things I did in my term in the Senate was met a guy by the name of Neil Fulton, who was the chief of staff of Governor Rounds. At the same time, I did a book with Behold with the poet Kathy Timpany, and she just did an extraordinary job with her poetry, showing me where photographs can go. And that's why I was delighted, absolutely delighted, to see my friend Molly Fulton's work on Instagram and say, "Man, this woman really, really understands the prairie, and does she ever?"
Is that your segue to me, Tom?
That's my segue to you, Molly.
I told Tom when we were chatting about how to present some of our work that it'd be wisest on my part to give him as much space as possible to speak, because Tom has a fantastic way with words, and he's extraordinarily complimentary, but he's also just a fabulous human. I guess I would first just say, echo the thanks that Tom said in being able to share our work. It's an incredible opportunity to connect with artists and to be able to talk about work, particularly through the lens of South Dakota, that's so important to all of us. There's a couple of notes that I would hit just quickly, and then I'm going to pass the baton back to you, Tom. But first of all, the launching place for me is a quote that I came across a long time ago. Spanish philosopher Jose Ortega Gasset said, and I've seen this several different translations of it, but the one that I like the best is, he said, "Show me the landscape in which you live, and I will tell you who you are." There's a spiritual dimension to the land that speaks to the inner core of who we really are. And I am so grateful for Tom's photographic eye, for his his ability to capture space that's so important to us in this very fresh way. And I'm incredibly grateful for Tom's wild idea to reach out to me and say, hey, I'm photographing this land and I want you to take these beautiful photographs and mess them up. And I can't tell you how open he was to just saying, yes, whatever you want. As I told him several times, Tom, these are great photographs. What am I ever going to add to them that wouldn't just destroy something that's beautiful as it is? So he was incredibly trusting, and that led to just a really fun collaborative process of thinking about place and space and what we see, what a photograph captures for us, and how that just, at least for me, transports me, whether I've been to that exact place or not. It transports me to a experience that I've had on the land that is similar, right? So some of our images are of small buildings out on farmland. The one you have in front of you right now is the Missouri River. We've all had these times and places that we remember, and Tom's photographic work takes us back to those places. And so the effort for me was to do my very best to synthesize not necessarily what I'm seeing in the photograph, but what I'm feeling. My dad is a Hamlin County kid. He's a farm kid. I've grown up in South Dakota with the Black Hills my whole life. And so all of these places and spaces are reverberating in me that Tom is photographing. They're reverberating in me something specific. And so trying to respond to that image with the one thing that I feel the most. And then in some way trying to get out of the way and both illuminate that space and then expand the space for the viewer to experience it as well. So for example, with the Missouri River here, to me, that the depth and the presence of water and the space above is what I feel. I can feel standing on that bluff, and I can feel the depth of the space beneath and the depth of the space above. And so just trying to respond to that. Tom, I want to hand the baton back to you and let you add some things. And I know we have some other slides to show, so if you want to slide through them as we talk, that's fine too.
Sure, happy to do that. When Cody at the Washington Pavilion first saw one of our images, I had 20 with me. He saw the first one and he says, I don't need to see any more. When do I put up the show? That was my first reaction when I saw this particular image. It's a favorite place of mine. I'm a sailor and I've sailed as a Boy Scout for decades. And if you're a sailor, then you understand the winds, you understand the weather, you understand the constellations, you understand and can feel the turn of the earth. But when I saw this particular, and I also love to swim fairly long distances in open water. And I've spent weeks at a time on this particular body of water along the Missouri River. And when you sail in these waters, you can literally feel the spin of the earth. But at the same time, you can also feel, you can also be afraid. I've never once gotten on a sailboat without being afraid because I have so much respect for it. And I have so much respect for everything that is in water and the waters below. And when I saw this image that Molly's deft hand created, I said, Molly, how do you know all of these things? Your instinct is perfect and pure.
See, Tom's just really, really nice too.
Let's talk about the elevator. One of the things that Skott said is let's be careful, because, and one of the things that Bill Bryson says, he says not only does the universe create you, but it can also destroy you. And this particular one of an elevator happens to be in Dempster, South Dakota. To me, is not only ominous, because you see the fire, if you will, on the right-hand side of the elevator. I mean, it's a monument to ourselves that we put these things up. But all of a sudden, what Molly has done is put this right in the middle of the universe. It's a perfect image and one of my favorite. and scary.
There's something about standing on the prairie at night, and I have teenage boys now, and we find that we are not outside under the stars as often as we should be. And I'm reminded in these night photographs of Tom's that the presence of the sky and the presence of those things that we can make out in this image, you can make it out a bit more, but you have that glowing moon behind you. You know the heaviness that night can be on the prairie. And that's part of what I was responding to in that photograph. And the next one, where we've got a line of snow-covered low hills. Tom and I have talked a lot about this, and I've thought a lot about the ways that being a South Dakotan requires us to be, in my feeling, we know ourselves best when we understand how we relate to the land. My dad would always say, we understand the land when we walk on it, right? When your feet are out on the land, you really get a sense of what that place is. And that's always been totally true to me. I would also say we understand who we are when we are on the land, and there's a connection to our history. So the quilting, to me, in this piece, the overlapping quilting connects me not just to the physical land, but also that familial landscape that we have that is woven into who we are.
The Greeks remind us that before we were born, we knew everything. It's as if we had God's eye, and we did. But the second we're born, we forget everything that we know. And one of the things that a photographer, and I guess all artists probably do, is try to rediscover that God's eye as you walk across the prairie, or as you photograph rocks that are looking like asteroids. And in this particular one, I mean, it's just a stock pond, and it's in Stanley County. But all of a sudden, what Molly has done is, I'm showing you what it looks like, but she's showing you what's really there. She's showing you the power of the loam, of the soil underneath the prairie. And one of the aspects of this photograph that I particularly like is the far distant horizon, the multicolored far distant horizon. I don't know whether that's sunsets or sunrise or the benefit of having sun on the prairie, but it is. But most spectacularly is that very subtle blue line that occurs up in the sky, and that just connects us to everything that is and everything that's there. It's extraordinary. I don't think did I tell you that the first image that I saw, I had to stop because I was just dumbstruck, and I said, Molly, these are perfect.
Let's see a couple more slides. Again, when you're working with fantastic photography, you do so with trepidation. Particularly when Tom sent me the night sky here with the image on the right, I was instantly taken back to Grandpa Grandma Gnome's farm, like I said, in Hamlin County, and being a 5-year-old kid and recognizing for the first time how many stars I could not comprehend, right? I mean, I think all of us can remember those first times when we saw the stars in the night sky, and how just overwhelming that is. And so between, I think, both of these, there's a response of, again, that connection to the greater landscape, the sky, the prairie, all those natural elements, but also the human element on that space. And there's a little bit of a tension there, right? We have such natural beauty, but that's not to say that there isn't some connection in the physical or in the human-made things as well. The elevator on the left represents man's intrusion on the land, for sure. It also represents a family's working to sustain themselves. It represents a connection that a family had to a community. I mean, there's so many aspects to these things that are on our landscape that are part of who we are. And I think in both of these, there was an attempt to try and reconcile those two things and find a peace and a balance in them.
I look at the image on the left, that's probably my grandfather's, but certainly my grandmother's apron as they were cooking breakfast on the prairie in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. I look at the image on the right, which is particularly interesting. Once again, Molly, I'm going to show you what's there. I'm going to show you what things look like. But what you're going to do is show me what's really there, and does she ever? Skott, particularly with cosmology today, I mean, it's always difficult to figure out whether or not we can remember the past, present, and the future. But with cosmology today and with spring and with string theory, I can, with what Molly has done with this image, is I can hear those strings vibrate, and I can understand directly the conversation that our cosmologists have when they say there's not 3 dimensions in time, there's 9 or 10 dimensions in time. And I can literally put my hand through this photograph and feel, if you will, those multi-dimensions of time. That's very popular today with multiverses and AI and all that sort of stuff. But Molly's talent and instinct, I think, has caught it perfectly.
I think that we have a couple more images. Yeah. And so, and I don't know, Tommy, there may be something else you want to talk about, but I would say that middle image is always a test to me when Tom would send me, you know, a pile of, like I said, fantastic imagery. Which ones do I want to respond to? Which ones do I feel called to respond to? Which ones are going to withstand my tampering around with them and playing around with them? Which ones will I just destroy? Because that happened too. But that middle image was very fun. It was one of the last in the series that we've worked on that came into being. It's a little bit different than some of the other ones, but there's something very elemental about that image as I was working with it. And I think there's a simplifying down, a clarifying that elevator expresses to me, the simplicity of the moon, the stillness of the moment. Yeah, you try to play with the scene without overpowering the scene, and this is one that just it felt like it was asking to be played with and to be certainly revered, respected, and simplified down. So I think that was the impetus in it.
When I looked at that middle image, I go, Molly, perfect once again, because to me, there's just a great, I mean, life is rich, life is beautiful. We have to treat ourselves as if we had a 1 trillionth chance of existing and having this conversation. But life can sometimes be pretty comical and sometimes even absurd. This is not an absurd image, but it says, maybe every once in a while, take a deep breath and understand that there are responsibilities in life, and that's to get through it successfully. The image on the far right hand side, I have to tell you, Molly, and I guess I probably already told you this before, is once again, look carefully at the loam, look carefully at the colors of the soil and all of the powers that we have underneath and within that soil. But most especially, if you would, take a look at the clouds and what that deft hand has done to outline the clouds. You will never see clouds. You will never see rain in the same way.
The clouds that we see in our South Dakota sky are, if we don't take time occasionally to look up and feel the presence of the clouds, man, we are missing out, right? So much of our landscape is made up of sky. And the way this image that Tom presented me with just underscored that expansive space. Is fabulous to just be able to sit back and remember, especially on a winter day, right? On a gray day where you have so much sky, but you don't see much of it. Those summer days where the expansiveness and the utter glory above you. What else can you do?
Yeah, just breathe, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Breathe and inhale.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that might be the end of our slides.
Oh, we got one more.
Yeah, we got a couple more. Yep. Okay. So again, the image on the left here is those I hate to say old farm buildings, that doesn't feel fair, because there's a lot more life and story in them. Being able to pause for a moment and think about what that space is and what it has been for folks that have come before us. And then the image on the right, Tom captured a lightning storm, and that, being somebody who lived on the shortgrass prairie of Pierre for 20 years, the image of the grasses down below and that big sky up above, you don't forget summer storms. And it felt very, very dangerous to add anything to this image without destroying that power. That's
the image of the old,
it's electrifying. I think that's
the image of the old barn to me speaks of fecundity. I don't know whether that's a male or a female symbol, but I think it's either one or two or both. And certainly speaks to that in South Dakota. But then what Molly has done is she's completely obliterated my beautiful sky and turned it into infinity. So once again, just Molly, thank you. The other image on the right is the same sort of thing that I think Sharon talked about yesterday, is the ability to walk into the maws of a tornado. I happen to be in the Sandhills, and this photograph was taken about 10 or 10:30 at night. Obviously, it's a long exposure, but I had this delicious thunderstorm that was coming at me, and it just connects to everything that we are, particularly when you've got Molly outlining the relationship of the skies, infinity, and again, the fecundity of the earth. Again, bingo, Molly.
I just end by saying thank you again to Tom for thinking about what it would be to collaborate together. I didn't understand what that might look like, and he was incredibly gracious and open and encouraging. And thank you to the folks with the South Dakota Art Museum and everyone involved in that for the opportunity to talk about our work. This is a treat.
Yep, and the same for sure. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for giving us some insight on this collaborative work. We have our final feature up next, James Pollock. And James states, creating small free-form drawings with no forward plan is one of his favorite ways of producing art. He has hundreds and maybe even thousands of small drawings like this. And for him, it is surprising and a mystery what a pen and hand can produce when guided by intuition. James?
My name is James Pollock, and I'd like to thank the Art Museum for this opportunity to, present these art chats that are really interesting. Can you back the picture off and put me up there? And I want to show the tools I use to start with on there. Can you take the picture away? Yeah. I use a spray bottle, watercolors, and a rapidograph art pen filled with India ink. That's the tools I had with the with this art project that I got. Now let's go back to art is a language in itself, and it's difficult for me to explain what my piece is. But unless you're a teacher, the artist's job is to create an art, not talk about it, I think. but I'm going to try to explain a little bit about this piece of art, mainly through the process that I used to develop it. During last week's art chat, Christopher Meyer mentioned how the process of making art is really important to him, and I think that's a valid point of view. And by my commenting on the process I use for creating this piece called The Gathering, hopefully I can give some insight into my creative process and how this piece of art came about. When I started, the paper was blank. There was no forward idea or concept that what was going to happen. There was no, I didn't decide that I'm going to make this picture of a gathering. That wasn't it at all. That came at the end. First thing I did is I sprayed the paper with some water with that little spray deal I had there. And when it was damp, I started drawing without any preconceived notion of what I was doing. At this point, I'm kind of like a transmitter, and I'm planting a seed on this from my subconscious to this piece of wet paper. And that's literally how it is with me. I'm still not drawing anything. I'm just, my hands are moving around, and it moves the ink and pen around. And but at some point when all this is going on, in my subconscious becomes less important. And when I'm talking about subconscious, I'm not sure where that is, whether it's me or whether it's a spiritual thing. There's ideas floating all around, and I just go out and grab them. I don't know. I call it my subconscious. But anyway, at some point, this becomes less important, and I start becoming more aware of what's going on the paper, and I start constructing things by using formal art elements, add a line here or there, or a curve here or there, an angle here and there. And there's a lot of, in this piece here, there's a lot of repetition. There's a lot of angles in it. There's a lot of curves in it. And it's an element of design that I use in this constructive process that's going on. So at this point, I start developing content. And by content, I mean outside idea associations start appearing. Some elements are grouped together, or united and making some kind of a cohesive whole of the whole picture. I start seeing things sort of like, it was like when I was a kid, I used to look at clouds and I would see shapes. And I start seeing these sort of shapes on this the lines that I had drawn, and I start developing them. I bring them out. I add a little, a piece here or a line there or a line there, and try to develop the art out of that. And I start seeing these objects. I see the essence of an object. I don't actually see an object, maybe. For instance, I don't dwell too much on the specific characteristics of an object. For instance, in this picture here, you might see some birds in there. And I might develop a bird, yet it's never like any bird that you ever saw or I ever saw before, but it's a bird. And so this is the sort of thing that I start developing. And as the ink dries, that's when I start putting the paint on. The India ink is, once that's dry, it stays permanent, and I can put ink on there and it won't run all over. Now the lines developed, they have a little fuzziness to some of them, and this is part of the characteristic of the drawing that gives it character. It gives it an element of mystery a little bit about how this all come about. And the fact of the matter is, the whole thing is kind of a mystery to me how it come about. But that's basically how this piece of art was developed. A lot of times, sometimes artists say, "Well, I don't know what to draw," or "I don't know what to create." My suggestion is maybe give this a whirl. Take a piece of, spray a little water on a piece of paper and take a pen and start scratching around and see what comes out. That's basically what happened here. Is it just started going about. I consider this piece here a finished piece of art. Sometimes I do these little drawings and I don't consider them finished pieces of art, but let's move on to slide 13. Here's another piece on the left there, Pen Pals. That was done with the same manner that I just got through describing how I did this, the gathering one. The one on the right, that's a little different in that I used a felt pen with it might have been had a little bit of a brush type tip to it, and I drew really quickly around. And again, there's a lot of repetition. When I draw these things, I don't know how to explain it, but if it's like I'm trying to find a balance in a picture, I'll put some something on the right, and then I'll say, well, there's something missing over here, and I'll go over there and draw a little bit in there, and it all just happens automatically, and I'm not sure how that all comes about. But again, both of these pieces I would consider finished piece of art. As a matter of fact, the one on the right, I think is somebody owns that. I don't have that in my possession anymore. Let's go now. There's another method of drawing, and sometimes I develop these small sketches into larger pieces. Let's move on to slide 4. Okay, here's the barbershop quartet. On the left is a little sketch. And I think that sketch is probably 3 by 4.5 inches. I put it on the piece here. It's not on the original, but I developed that into a larger piece, pen and ink. And the larger piece is quite large. It's 19.5 inches by 25.5 inches. And the same thing here as shopping cart robots on the right. That was those little sketches that are 3.5. I just have thousands of those, and they've never been developed. And I mean, maybe I've developed 15 or 20 of them out into the larger pieces like this. I'm often going to wonder what happened when I'm not around. All these little sketches, if they're going to go to the dumpster, and I sure hope they don't, but they might. But I'd like to see some computer artists get a hold of them and bring them into theirs and do a collaboration like Molly and Ahmed done with their sort of thing. There's color can be added. There's a myriad of things that can be done with a computer with these things. Let's go to slide 15. There's a universal weather vane, and sometimes I write little stories with these, and on the last one I might read the little story that goes with the one that was with that one. But I had a little story with the universal weather vane, and it does it. It's a universal weather vane because it points in all directions. And the whistling bandmaster on the right, again, those were the little sketches, and I made them into larger finished pieces of art. I don't know what to say about where these ideas of mine come from. In this case, they're quick. They're done really quick. The sketch is done really quick, and I have no idea where the idea for them comes from, or they just kind of happen, and that's the best I can say about that. And the next one is the dance of the lollipops. And that one is I have a little story that goes with it. Sometimes I write little stories that go with the pictures, and I'll let me read it doesn't take long. I'll read the story that goes with the dance. Once upon a time in a faraway land, a sweet and good king called for a festival to celebrate his kingdom's prosperity and good fortune. Inhabitants of this fortunate land gathered from far and wide, through mountain passes and down fertile valleys. They came in large numbers from all parts of this happy kingdom. Even though the king asked that fun-making be kept simple, all the excitement spontaneously ceased, caused an odd but marvelously colorful occurrence. All of the lollipops in the kingdom started to dance. To this day, whenever the king calls for a celebration, festivities begin with the colorful dance of the lollipops. That's a story that goes with that. But so I always name the pieces after I'm done, but if I don't name them and somebody else looks at the pieces, they come up with other things. And so I don't know how to explain all this, these things and where the ideas come from or anything like that. That's about all I got to say about my art. I really appreciate the art museum allowing us to give our ideas and show a little bit about our process that we use. But the process to me is like it's an important part of how I create my art. And with these type of things, I don't have any preconceived notion. I mean, the little sketch and the idea of lollipops came later. I didn't start out with, I want to draw some dancing lollipops. That is not how it happened. It happens backwards the other way. And these are quite different. It's a different process when I go out. I like to go out and do plein air work and paint on location. And it's a completely different process when I do that, type of art. That's about all I got to say about my art.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, James. And I love that we ended with the dance of the lollipop story. So I'm going to take off the presentation, and now we're open for our Q&A.
I've got a quick question for all the participating artists here today. That I'm just curious to think that a lot of you are outdoors creating nature in your artwork, and Jim seems to have transferred that into his imagery of a spontaneous creation of works that to me seem like they would be influenced by plein air work. What do you think, Jim?
Any type of artwork that I nature is where I'm always, that's been the cradle of all my ideas, and even those little quirky little drawings, and I call them melodies, little art melodies, but there's a lot of nature involved in them. There's animals, little creatures, and there's little landscapes, and it's the land and the nature is a part of me. I grew up on a farm, and I still have some farmland, and it's just everything is nature is part of me. It's part of the art I do.
So all of the artists today have been inspired and draw influence from nature.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I know those bluffs that Tom had. The pictures were up there. I know those bluffs well. I've lived along the river all my life. I started up in Pollock. I grew up in Pollock, and then I'm living in Pierre now. And so, I love the river and the bluffs along the river, and it's just part of me. Did I see up here, Dick Reddy's on up here? There he is. Dick Reddy, I went to college at South Dakota State when he was there. But he isn't, he's muted, I think.
James, what did you study in college? Do you have an art background, or is this something that's always been in your story?
Yeah, I have an art major. It's an interesting thing is that when I was going to college at South Dakota State, I think there was probably there might have been 7 or 8 art majors, but they had an art department, and the reason they had the art department was they had the home ec department and they had home decorating and things like that, and so they needed the art part of it. Madeline Ritz was the head of the art department at that time. And of course, she's the one, her and the all these women's organizations around the state are the one that got together and made sure that South Dakota Art Museum got built. And I remember her, Madeline was quite a lady. She did a lot of home decorating, and she would call up, people would call her and want to have their house decorated, and I'd be in her office and I heard her do this. And she'd say, well, I think you ought to put a little pink over here or a little green over here. I mean, she didn't, she was in her office at South Dakota State and telling somebody how to decorate their house, and they didn't have Zoom like they did this. I mean, she was just, I don't know how she did it. The other thing about her was, I said, I swear she could introduce two people and not know either one of them. You know, she just had that characteristic about her. She was quite a lady. Yeah.
So I received a direct message question for Molly and Tom. Do you have plans for more collaborations?
Molly, do we?
That's a great question. That's a tension right now. Tom had said at one point, this is a collaboration that will go on in perpetuity. I suspect there is an aspect of that that's true. Tom?
Well, I certainly hope so. I mean, we all have the responsibility as a result of this gift that we have of in gratitude of regifting that. And it's through that process of endurance and hard work that we regift that. Once I was driving for you in Spearfish, Scott, I was driving back from the Black Hills. I wanted to go way up north because I'd never seen the skies up there. It was snowing. So I cursed the day and I drove through the Badlands instead. And all of a sudden came upon, it was snowing with snowfalls, with snowflakes, that literally there was no wind and the snowflakes were falling just like my hand is falling. And I come around this corner and what do I see? I heard a buffalo. And so I've got some very large 6 to 8 foot buffalo in a snowstorm photographs that Molly and I are talking about redoing. So I'm very much hoping that once again we have the opportunity to put Molly's instinct and deft hand to work.
I got a question for Scott. That's a conspiracy question. Is you since you know look at all these photographs, there's always these stories that they've cut out little pieces of film out of these images that are coming back from outer space because of one reason or another. Maybe they see some object or something in, or they didn't want everybody else to see, or things like that. Is there any truth to that?
I don't know about that one, but it's just funny to see like they've busted most of the conspiracy theories around like the moon landing, but still I read a study that said it used to be 30% of people believe that the moon landing was fake. Now it's like 9 to 5% of people, and it still shocks me that there's still that much that think, you know, they're cropping things out, including things, missing things. So
well, people want easy answers, and that's what conspiracy theories provide.
Yep.
Molly and Tom, now when you do that work on there, do you send him Tom, do you send her a photo and then she paints on top of it, or do you do it digitally, or what's the procedure on that?
Oh no, it's a process where you physically deliver to Molly the photographs, and then a month or 2 months later she physically delivers them back.
Okay.
Some of them are, we have a couple of mediums, but some of them are on a photo paper. Most of them, I think, are probably on a photo canvas. So we had a little playing around with what seemed to work best with the mediums I was applying, but and what we could get our hands on. But most of them are canvas, and I think that's maybe a little bit of an old school way of doing it, right? I had some conversations about possibly doing, adding some graphic, my work, digitizing it so that there's some motion on the image, you know, and that is enticing. I don't know, Tom and I haven't talked about that a whole lot. It's enticing and interesting to think about, but I also personally really enjoy the process of looking at a photograph as a photograph, and then having that tactile experience of placing something on it. So that's what we have done up to this point.
Well, and James and Scott, like, you know, I mean, a photograph is a photograph, and there are borders on a photograph because that's what the photographer wants you to see. And Molly has felt with abandon that she can violate any and every border, and does.
Rightfully so.
That's what I do. You said to do what you want, and so do you at your word.
That's great fun.
So I have some more questions that have been messaged to me. This one's for James. Since your sketches are organic in creation, do you have artists that have influenced your work?
Yeah, I do. Maybe in the procedures that I use, I'd say that, you know, I've done a lot of the Bauhaus movement, the whole Bauhaus movement that was started in 1913 in Weimar, Germany, and it moved on until 1933 when it got shut down. They shut down on their own, but Hitler was squeezing them out. He thought it was degenerate art they were doing, but it was these procedures that they were using during the Bauhaus, and you know, Kandinsky, Paul Klee, all those teachers that were there at that time, they left notes, and I always studied their procedures, how they do art, you know, and that's a lot of how it hasn't had an influence on me. Yes, it has, that way.
And there's another question for Scott. Can you tell us more about your documentary project you're working on?
Actually been working on it for a little while now, but I've been doing a documentary project on roadside attractions and oddities, because I feel like they're a very unique, just kind of cultural thing that's going away as the road trip has changed, as the history of the landscape has changed. We've got, I just found out that the Petrified Gardens over by the Badlands had shut down. So all these old iconic landmarks of the American road trip are kind of going away. And so I've been doing a documentary project, kind of trying to find these attractions and oddities and trying to photograph them before they go away. It's fun, but it's a lot of driving.
Back to that responsibility to do what you do, Scott.
Yep.
And there's another question from Stephen. Photographers, have you considered using drones for creating landscapes?
I have in the past, but the thing I've run into with drones is it's hard to get them where you want to get them now because of FAA regulations and airspace regulations. You can't fly over like national and state parks. There's a lot of restrictions around them now, and I know that the government is kind of being even more so because DJI, the manufacturer, is owned by a Chinese company, and you have to be constantly connected to the internet, and there's a surveillance type of fear that goes into people using drones. And also, I know you need to be highly licensed if you're going to make money off of your drone. So I've used them for personal projects and to film some things, but it's one of those things that I've tried to balance the good with the bad, and it's fun. It gives some unique perspectives, but I don't personally feel like it fits into a lot of my work, be it the documentary work or other things. But they're fun to fly. It's like, I wish I had one of the FPV ones so I could do all the fun stunts.
Yeah, I agree with that. They are fun to fly. I've got a recreational one that I use, but when I'm standing out on the prairie or doing portrait photographer, I have to be there and see. Hopefully, as I'm doing that, I can feel the spin of the earth once again, and I don't get that with the drone.
Any final questions for these artists? Okay, well, we can close it off here today. Thank you all so much for joining us, and we'll be having another one of these. We're going to take a little bit of a hiatus. We're gonna
Abby,
continue- Yeah.
Abby, we did have one chat that was sent to me personally. So let me it's for Jim, and there's wondering the question is, could there be any connection between your present work and the wartime drawings you did during Vietnam?
No, I don't think, no, I don't think so. When I left the Army, the Army took all the art. When I was, for those that don't know, during the Vietnam War, Steve Rano was too, and we were both what they called at that time was combat artists. They had a Vietnam combat art program, and they had teams of artists that they sent into Vietnam, and I was on one of those teams that went in there. And when we were done, the Army took all of our art and all of our sketches, everything we did, and it's in the National Museum of the U.S. Army in Fort Belvoir, Virginia. And I kind of left that behind me, and I really haven't, it was something that was a part of my life, but it hasn't affected what I'm doing now. I don't think if it's maybe on a subconscious level, it does. Some of the artists have done books about it, of their artwork. I did quite a bit of promoting of that project because I really think it's important for the people of the country to see that artwork. And I've always been a great supporter of. I did a CD and I give talks about that art, but so I'm a great I like to promote that and make that available for people to view the art that went on. But as far as carrying over into the artwork that I'm doing now, I don't think that's happening. But thanks for the question.
Thank you, James. All right, well, thank you all so much. And like I said, we're going to take a little bit of a break with the artist chats, and we're going to start back up on April 20th. And we're shifting to the afternoon window. So it'll be at 4:30 p.m. Central, 3:30 p.m. Mountain. Because you've signed up for this Zoom chat, you're already registered for the next one. So we'll send you an email when it comes closer, but we hope to see you there.
Thank you so much to all of our artists and to all of our participants. We're glad to have you here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. Thanks so much.